Hello and welcome, everybody, to episode 31 of Last Week in Quantum. I'm your host, Bill Roth, and this is the show where we review the week's news in the world of quantum computing and its impacts on the world of cybersecurity, AI, and more. And with us to discuss this week is our all-star panel. As always, leading off is Brandon Dennis, Director of Operations at QuSecure. Welcome, Brandon.
Happy to be back, Bill.
And longtime QuSecure guy, first-time guest, Pete Ford, Head of Federal Operations at QuSecure and a vaunted TEDx speaker. Welcome, Pete.
Nice to join y'all.
So lots of stuff to get to, a bunch of really great articles, and of course, all these links will be in the show notes. Last week in Quantum, we saw an article about JP Morgan Chase establishing quantum-secured crypto-agile networks. NVIDIA had some news about launching quantum computer centers with QuSecure platform. And finally, a discussion on quantum security conversation must be part of our conversation about national security and defense. So let's get started with our experts. So the first article was from JP Morgan about establishing a quantum secure crypto agile network. Brandon, give us the context on that.
Yeah, JP Morgan Chase has connected 2 data centers over deployed fibers. And in the article, Pete, Lori Beer mentioned a dual remediation strategy involving post-quantum cryptography and QKD. Could you explain how those 2 components can work together?
Sure. It's exactly what we want to have happen. And matter of fact, our last article today, we'll talk about some of that with Defense in Depth that John Prisco talks about too. In this particular case, what we're seeing, and I always been at when I'm looking at what is this article saying, there's the 3 lanes of quantum that I think about: quantum computing, quantum comm, and quantum sensing. So this one's in the quantum comm side of the house. And remember, there's 2 bins in that for QKD and our post-quantum comm encryption side of the house. In this case, what they showed was we've got 2 connected data centers over fiber. If you actually pull the article up, it was 46 kilometers, and they were having about 100 gigabits per second with a really low qubit error rate, around 0.8%. So they actually tied the QKD together, and then they drove an internal VPN from those 2 data centers to make it happen.
Excellent. So thanks for the clear description of that. A quick reminder, folks, you can find the links to all the articles mentioned today in the show notes. And if you want weekly quantum updates, subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast on Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. Stay up to date with top news in quantum with Last Week in Quantum. So, folks, our next article, NVIDIA launches quantum computer centers with the QuSecure platform. Brandon, give us the context.
Yes, sir. Pulled this article from VentureBeat. NVIDIA announced it will accelerate quantum computing efforts at national supercomputing centers around the world with open source NVIDIA QuSecure platform. So, Pete, out of the article, the question I came up with quantum computing being in its nascent stages, what challenges do you foresee in fostering widespread integration into existing technology infrastructures?
That's a great question. I'll go back to, we bend it, right? Last article was in quantum comm. This article is quantum compute. And if the learners here think about QuSecure is what we're talking about here in quantum compute, we're talking about GPU, i.e. classical compute, and QPU, which is quantum computing capability. In this particular case, they're increasing the environment for us to do variational quantum factoring. Being able to pull, and a QuSecure basically pulls, if you do some study on it, between 26 and 40 qubits, and allows us to do classical GPU-driven computing and quantum computing together. And that's in a variational quantum factoring environment. So why I may not have access in some of these, this is 9 different centers, which is awesome for us to do that. It lets me start putting classical and quantum computing applications together, so I offload the math in different ways and grow this. So that's what this one is. And remember, I've been all of our articles, and I would encourage all of us to, do I need to take action on this, or is it just for learning? Is it near term or is it far term? So in our last one, it was learning and it was far term because we saw some QKD growth that was wonderful. And this time on this bin of quantum computing, we're looking at learning what they're doing, and it's more far term action because the variational quantum environment that puts classical and quantum together while we're developing a cryptonically relevant quantum computer lets us practice the application and math offloading into a QPU, so a GPU that doesn't do that same type of math doesn't have to. So this is 9 global uses. That means a lot of guys on keyboards practicing the classical GPU and the quantum QPU that CUDA 9 provides. And it's phenomenal because variational quantum factoring is going to be the way that we're going to find the first breaking, going from noisy intermediate scale to intermediate scale quantum computing that will turn into a cryptonically relevant quantum computer. Great article.
Yeah, excellent. I think it sort of underscores the fact that quantum will be another mode of computing, and it's great to see that these centers are being put together. Our third article from Forbes is that defense must be part in defense. The quantum security has to be part of the discussion because we know we're sort of moving to a kind of great powers competition. And so it's got to be part of it. Why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of the article, Brandon?
Sure thing. The quote I pulled out of the Forbes article here was, as quantum computing advances, it threatens to break traditional cryptographic schemes like RSA and ECC, and implementing quantum resistant algorithms as part of a defense in-depth strategy ensures that data remains protected even as quantum capabilities evolve. So, Pete, I think we have a near-term and actionable article on our hands with this one.
Oh, yeah. I will. And to keep our listeners on their toes for tune in next week, IBM just produced an article saying we need QSCs, quantum safe champions. And if there is a guy with a T-shirt, aside from all of us who are quantum apostles, that is a quantum safe champion, it is John Prisco who wrote this. And by the way, it matches exactly what he covered on his prediction in September of 23 about what we're going to do. He said, basically, I need quantum safe champions. You got to look at quantum and all the pieces that we're looking at as a differentiator. And then we need to engage in a lot of public-private partnerships to get this. The biggest call to action at the bottom of it. And by the way, if you're reading this, read a lot of stuff from John and from us. And we pull a lot out of that because he is describing way out there in the future. We got to do something about this now. So this is not in quantum compute. This is not in quantum sense. This is in quantum com. So it's quantum key distribution, which is where he goes into a lot of it. And then our post-quantum encryption side too. His defense in depth and layering parts that he talks about is combining those. So the bigger chunk of this whole thing is at the end of this, he's asking Gina Raimondi, Department of Commerce lead, can you please get NIST to give us some standards? If you remember, and you heard me brief before, one of the things I talk about that's been a drawback for QKD is one, it's a hardware-based thing, but two, we don't have standards identified for it. John lays out some great, and it is worth having a good bourbon when you read this because it's worth listening to, is the report card that came out of the OSD and the U.S. government recently talked about a report card from QKD saying we're getting better. If you've heard this in the past, you've heard that QKD is really slow, not getting there, doesn't have standards involved. Well, he mentions, hey, the QKD initial authentication, the man in the middle and DDoS attack are fixed with some of the KMS. Welcome to what QSecure does too. And then basically the measurement device independence for QKD gives them 3 new places that says we're getting better scores. Great. Do some study on QKD and see this. He's saying the defense in depth, which is very important, is I need a layered security. We fully agree. I need better risk management. Oh, for the love of goodness, yes. And that, by the way, for us is crypto agility, which we talk about. We need redundancy. You got to have that. We offer it too. That's why we have multiple algorithms and the ability to flip on the fly. And then the next one is adaptability. In other words, I don't have time to rip the overhaul the full building. I need to get something in place without a denial of service. And then I need comprehensive protection, which is basically an operational picture that we give on our GUI, and we want the customers to see as well. If we can get them to give us a QKD protective posture, we're winning, and that's what he's asking NIST for. We agree, because our defense in depth is the agility of cryptography that we provide in a single control plane, and QKD as well. We want both of them. We need to think like an adversary, and we need to know that we've got protection, redundancy, and the capability to put in place for not just warfighters, but for our nation.
It's true. In the coming struggles, in the coming great power competition, it's the deep, detail-oriented work that's being done now that sows the seeds for victory. So I really appreciate the context that you provided for this, Pete.
If I can add one more thing, Bill,
please do.
When you read what John wrote, he's got a 2024 prediction. This carries on. In the IBM article that you'll hear about next week, which is phenomenal, says, look at this as a differentiator. We already recognize it. The defense in depth he's talking about, when we remember the 3 bins, compute, sense, and comm, when he's talking defense in depth, he is in afterburner, way ahead of a lot of people, where a lot of folks are just thinking the post-quantum encryption and comm world that we live in here in classical compute. He's adding defense in depth for both the encryption algorithms and the QKD that will eventually have to work together. That's why we talk about our real agility is not just for the classical compute, but classical as it goes to quantum. You're still going to need crypto agility that's orchestrated in a control plane to talk about what John does. And he is the bomb. I've never met him, but I would love to, because it's a great article.
Well, check out that link in the description where you get your podcasts. Learn more about that author and that article. Folks, that's all today for today's show. I'm your host, Bill Roth. And with us this week has been, as always, Brandon Dennis, Director of Operations, and first-time guest, but we're going to have him back, Pete Ford, Head of Federal Operations at QuSecure, and an acclaimed TEDx speaker. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week on Last Week in Quantum.